The Apostle Paul wrote about the sufferings and the stresses he faced. Pastors today still face enormous pressures. Burnout is real. Sessions, elder teams, leadership teams often love their pastors but don't always know how to support them. Many pastors feel the strain of balancing long ministry hours with the needs of their family, while also carrying the emotional weight of conflict and divisions within their teams. At Shepherd and Care, we provide a safe place for pastors to process these struggles, receive biblical guidance, and find rest in the gospel. Our goal is to help them lead from renewal, not exhaustion. Go to shepherdandcare.org to find out more information. Webinar From Burnout to Renewal, How Pastors Drift into Burnout and How to Find their way back. This is a crucial concept that we're going to talk through today because so many pastors are just stressed out. And we know that. The stats do say that 70% of pastors feel an enormous amount of stress themselves. 60% are reporting that they're emotionally exhausted. And being a pastor is a unique role that it embodies the whole person's life. I created a couple different polls for us today. I'd love to know, where do you find yourself at? Are you thriving and energized in life right now? Are you doing okay but stretched? Are you running on empty, burned out, near burnout? So as the numbers are coming in, we got a couple people who are feeling like they're running on empty, they're burned out. Most of you, by God's grace, are feeling they're doing okay but stretched. And there's one person who's feeling that they're thriving and energized, which is just really awesome. And so I want to share just a little bit about my story. Some of you guys are very familiar with my story. And so this today is coming from just a lot of personal experience, but not just about my personal experience, but about what the Lord is doing. You can see that there's three pictures and three kind of just different timelines for me. Across is the three different times or two different times in my life that I was burned out. The picture with the blue shirt, that's when I was serving as youth pastor in my first ministry. And at the same time, it's not just a youth pastor, I was also running an upward sports ministry. Now, I came into the ministry, I wanted to be sold out for Jesus. And so I was okay with running on empty because I really thought that's what ministry was about and how you're supposed to live for Jesus, especially when you're in the ministry, because you just hear about all these stories about running hard and running fast. But then it led into the years I call gospel boredom. That's what I've named that chapter in my life. But the really truth is that I had burned out. I loved being youth pastor. I was a high relational guy and just loved pouring into teenagers. And the church wanted to start up a basketball program. And I was enthused to do that because I loved basketball and I loved the adventure to be able to do it. What it required was a lot of areas that I was not truly gifted in. And it was a lot of administrative roles. Yet I loved the challenge. And so I poured myself into that. But I had not learned how to pace myself, added hours to my work week. Instead of a 50-hour work week, I started going to 70-hour work weeks and never really taking the days off because it compiled up year after year. And so after my first season leading the Upward Sports ministry, I had burned out, but I was so young in the ministry, I was maybe 24 at the time, that I didn't quite fully understand what burnout was. And I just thought, okay, I'm tired and I'm exhausted. I had enough energy to be able to push through. But when it came back around the second year, it got even worse. By the third year, I just started to dread the sports season coming on and just said, the cloud, the fog is just coming over top of me. I'm just going to have to go into my office, work through all the administrative stuff so that everybody else can enjoy the sports ministry that's going on and it seemingly is going successful all at the same time. I just was running further and further on empty. And that was my first round of burnout. And I just thought that's what ministry was. And so I lived a life of burnout. It became a lifestyle for 6, 7 years early on in my ministry. And so by God's grace, I was able to recover without realizing that I was recovering. And I still remember vividly getting that picture taken of my wife and my children. That one was actually far worse than the first round of burnout. The second round of burnout that I had in 2017, I just changed and transitioned to a new church. In the same year I was doing that, I had lost my mom, and so I was grieving the loss of my mom. My youngest son, who's from Ethiopia, we adopted him, brought him home from Ethiopia in 17. Within the 6-month time frame, I also had to sell a house, redid a kitchen, bought a new house, had to redo another kitchen, And then I had multiple other things that were just going on. I can look back on that season of life that it just became too much. And then the role that I had, I loved what I was doing, but the burdens that were being shared with me, I didn't have a place to process those. I just lost a community by my old church, started in a new church that I was enjoying. Yeah, everybody was new to me and I was new to them. And so we didn't have those trusted relationships that are truly needed. When COVID finally hit, I was actually already burned out before COVID hit. And so then going through COVID, I joke and say that I was already burned, but then by the time COVID hit, I had been flipped, fried, and I was crispy on the other side. And so that actually led to depression. And that was a really hard one as a pastor, as I'm still caring for people, holding it together at work or at the church service, but then coming home and just feeling like I had nothing left. And so there was a turning point, several turning points. We'll probably get to them in the presentation today. But that's my story. And my hope is that no pastor ever has to face the years and the agony that I went through. They were able to learn from some of the things the mistakes I had, the pastoral rhythms that are needed. I just try to push through on my own. That's my background, and by God's grace, I was a pastor who burned out, and by God's grace, He has renewed me. It doesn't mean that I don't face this and fight this still today, because I have a tendency to do that, to go move to burnout. Let's move on. What is burnout? So many people, like, we talk about it, it's a buzzword, burnout and stuff, but what is it? And so if you look here, there's the stress curve, and there's nothing wrong with stress. There is actually a lot of good stress that happens into our life, but if you start from the left side, move to the right. There's too little stress. There's inactive in the green side. And then there's optimum stress. When we get fatigued, we get tired, we take breaks and we rest. If you're running a marathon or you're playing a sport, in the middle of the game, you're going to take a break. It's very common. But in life or in situations as a pastor, there's optimum stress, but yet we don't stop when we become fatigued. We continue to move on. It moves into a place of exhaustion. There's too much stress. The stress becomes more complex. It became a lifestyle for me, so it just continued to the point where it goes beyond just being fatigued, exhausted, to now you're feeling just anxious, and you're falling into more just panic, and you're falling into more anger, and it just breaks down. And then when we're talking about burnout, we're really talking about that area in the red right there for us. I started thinking about, is there people who are more prone to this? And so, yeah, there's an equation. We'll talk about the wiring, and I'll get a poll as to where you may find yourself at. There's a wiring plus the circumstances that you're under. And it's not just the circumstances. It's not how hard the circumstances are, but it's how the pastor or how the person carries that hardness, carries the weariness. Plus, there's a place of just the duration, how long. For my first ministry, right, it was 6 years. Second ministry, there's a level of intensity that happened, all in a brief moment in time. And then you come to a place of where you just believe that this is never going to change. This is life. There's no hope. And as a Christian, this is a really hard place to be at. And so you come to a place that just is burnout. And it's a sad place to be. It's a hard place to be. And so this is why we're talking about today. So this is the equation. They can think through the person's wiring, the circumstances, the duration, intensity. And so that finally opens up to a place of burnout. From burnout to renewal. So we'll talk about just the wiring. There's 4 different quadrants of the wiring. Now, I want you to think about, where do you find yourself in the wiring here? And so there's the driven shepherd. There's performance and identity. And so the core belief, I am what I produce, and if I fail, I'm a failure, right? And so what it looks like, they never stop working, can't mentally shut off. They take criticism personally. Their ministry becomes their identity. And so the pattern is, there's this overextension, there's exhaustion, because there's an identity crisis. In all 4 quadrants, something that I would need pastors to think about is that we were created by God to be children of God, saved by grace, then called into the ministry. And so one of the areas of confusion that I believe pastors or people get into is that my vocation is what I was created for. The vocation of being a pastor. You were called into being a pastor. And so being a pastor is not your first and foremost identity. Being a pastor is what God has called you and how to serve him, not who he has called you to be. So with this, there's the driven shepherd. Then there's this next one. And I actually find myself more into this area, the burden shepherd, the over responsible and the anxious one. In the core belief, I'm responsible for everyone's well-being. And when I was a pastor, this is how I functioned. It says what it looks like and carries people's long after conversations, feels others' pain deeply, struggles to release outcomes to God, and the burnout patterns, emotional overload, compassion fatigue, and depletion. And I definitely find myself in that one. I can find myself in all four quadrants as well. So they say yes too often, avoids the hard conversations, lives under relational pressure, and the pattern is there's hidden stress, turns into resentment, and there's just this quiet exhaustion. And so the internalizing shepherd is the unprocessed and suppressed, is that I just need to push through. And what it looks like is they avoid emotional awareness, they keep going without processing, has no safe place to be known. The pressure build up, sudden crash, numbness, and they don't take the awareness of, man, I'm going through a hard time and maybe I need to take a break, and they just continue to push through. Here is where do you find yourself at? It looks like we got a kind of a spread across the board for everyone. And so this is very relatable for all of us. It's good to know where you process and how you are wired and where you tend to be. Now, this is not always predictable, but if you're tending to be this way, then we need to have an awareness as to when I'm going through a hard time, this is where I most naturally lean into in this area. And then we talk about the circumstances that we are facing. And let's just think about it. There are so many different scenarios that people go through just in life in general that are very stressful. But on top of that, as you're caring for God's people, as a pastor, there's a weariness of shepherding. There's a weariness of sermon prep. There's a weariness of planning strategic things for the future. There's a weariness in just leadership across the board. And there's multiple different things. And so as we think about this, is from what are the circumstances that we face? And so the circumstances are the external and internal conditions that over time and without hope create unsustainable pressure. If you start at the yellow, the spiritual circumstances, right? And we'll just talk about the spiritual, the social, intellectual, physical, and emotional. And so in the circumstances, and sometimes there's spiritual misalignment in and there's the ministry over intimacy. And so there's multiple different things that are happening in our spiritual life, the circumstances that really deter. And so when we're getting drained, it's happening. In being a pastor is really hard sometimes. There's this relational strain and cultural strain. There's 24/7 access to some pastors that I'm talking to. The church just has this expectation that no matter what, you should be answering your people. You need to be available. So there's high expectations. So there's not really these boundaries. You're known publicly. Everybody knows you, but they don't actually know you personally, and so you don't have the confidential relationships that you really need. Then there's this intellectual side of things. As you're just going on in ministry, your mind just gets overloaded because let's face it, there are so many things that are happening in a pastor's life that you got to be thinking about. And as you get moving into burnout, it can become just like an overload for you. And it's really sad when you have to prepare a sermon and it becomes more of an intellectual sermon because you're just pushing through because Sunday's always coming and you haven't taken a place of rest. You come to a place of depletion. And so then you're going, I have to preach something that I haven't spent any time actually praying over. I haven't spent any time reflecting, is this true for my life? And so you preach and it can become just almost regretful or disconnected from what you're even preaching. And then there's the physical, is the depleted body that just it can't sustain it. And so because you've gone on and you're just going further and longer during this time, that just makes it really hard for you in your life. There's chronic and unresolved pressure. And there's unresolved relationships constantly in the course of the church. And then there's unprocessed emotional load. I remember a time, I'll share this scenario. I was with a group of elders and I said, hey, we just went through a really hard time. Can we take a moment to lament? just we just went through. And an elder, and we joke about this now because we went out to breakfast about a year later after he said this, and he was doing exactly what he was almost criticizing. And he spoke up and says, "Are you saying we just need to verbally vomit what we're experiencing right now?" And I realized that we weren't going to be able to do that in the moment. But a year later, he was actually just lamenting about all the hardship. And so the unprocessed emotional load, I would suggest let's do it then and there. But when we didn't do it then and there, we just carried that weight for a whole other year, and different people carry it differently. And so then there's the lack of boundaries in recovery rhythms. I can tell you, I did not start my ministry within very good pastoral rhythms of when to take a break and even knowing how to take a break and being refreshed and being renewed. And then there's the spiritual misalignment, and I felt fractured in my own life. And so the relational and cultural strain. Sometimes you get called to a church and you're saying, I don't know if I really fit this culture, or there's relational strain with somebody on staff, somebody in the leadership, somebody in the church. There's just always some type of relational strain that we're facing. And so cognitive and emotional load, I've talked a little bit about that. And so then the physical and the neurological just depletion, because sometimes I believe that churches, we will separate the spiritual and the physical, but yet they're so interconnected, the psychosomatic union between the two, that we have to think about how the physical and the spiritual, how they interact together. Role misalignment. I told you about my first role doing upward sports, and just I enjoyed it, but yet it was so task driven. There was a role misalignment. And then there's just the weight of shepherding people. These are just the circumstances. And so it's how we process these things or don't process that really has an effect on us. So talk about the stress curve is that there's a duration, there's moving past fatigue. I need to take a break. I need to pull back and just continue to press through. There's the exhaustion that you're now facing, which moves into levels of anxiety and the panic and the anger. Burnout and self-harm actually have similar characteristics. That you know that you shouldn't be doing this, and yet when you fall into burnout, you know it's harmful for you, but yet you still don't stop. There was a time in my life that burnout became such a habit that I became almost more addicted to the dopamine effect of revving myself up, and I didn't feel good unless I was in a stressful situation. And then I felt good. Now, you might not think about stressful situations like I did. I don't feel good unless I'm serving the Lord. Then my body, then I feel like I'm worshiping the Lord if I'm serving. If I'm not serving, I feel guilty. I feel that I'm sinful. That is the stress response that you have when it comes to falling into false of burnout. And probably, I'll explain it to you. When I was going for school for counseling, had to write a reflection paper, and she wrote onto one of my papers as I was doing a reflection paper, and I was talking about and first understanding what burnout was and exhaustion and all the things. And she said, Adam, if you continue to go to the well and not allow the well to fill back up, and you keep pressing through and not taking a break, that you keep withdrawing the water from the well, that all you have left is to give the scum from the bottom of the well to the people that you're caring for. And so that has just stuck with my mind. I love pouring into people. But if I'm not first allowing Christ to fill me up, then I start to give out of my own strength. And my own strength has a very small and limited capacity. And so what I started giving to people was really the scum at the bottom, not just to the people I was pastoring, but then also to my wife and also to my kids. I remember a time, I believe it was, when I was going through burnout. I was so exhausted, and I'd gotten away just for a couple of days and came back home and told my wife Lauren, it's like, hey, you really need to get away. It's so refreshing. It's so good. I was feeling rejuvenated at that moment. And she just looks at me and says, I can't get away. I was like, why not? I'll take care of the kids. And she said, I can't get away. She didn't trust me with the kids because I had no patience with them. I was yelling at them. My anger was coming out because I was so burned out. I couldn't care for my own kids. And that was very humbling. And so from then on, I made it a promise that it is my responsibility to get better so that you trust me with the kids so you can get away. That was a low point in my life in the depression. I wish I could say that it got better immediately, but it didn't. And so I continued to carry for several more months afterwards as well. So there's the wiring, there's the circumstances, there's the duration and the intensity, and coming to a place where you just feel absolutely no hope in this. And so it comes to a place of burnout. There's social fatigue, there's passion fatigue, there's emotional fatigue, and intellectual, physical, spiritual, moral, and existential fatigue. Well, let's talk a little bit about the moral fatigue and the existential fatigue. The moral fatigue is that there is a consistent pattern that, especially as pastor, you continue to move further and further, and the less you're being filled up by the Word of God, by the Spirit, and less abiding by the Spirit, and you're fighting these things more on your own strength, there's a lack of integrity. And so you actually start cutting corners, or you start compromising. Or as Christians, we need physical energy for spiritual strength as well to fight temptation. That's just the reality. And so we become more numb to many things, and we start justifying unhealthy patterns. And so it's almost with burnout, there's only a matter of time before you're going to make some really unhealthy choices in your life because you're not be able to fight it. And then the temptation just gets so real as well. That's one of the real dangers of burnout. And by God's grace, He spared me from going into any moral disqualification or anything. And He kept me from multiple different things, only I say by His grace. And so, which turns into an existential fatigue, right? And we just really start questioning, is following the Lord, is it serving God's church, is it really worth it? If this is how I'm going to feel, if this is what it's going to be, this isn't worth it anymore. I'm going to go try to find a new place. I'm going to give up on the church. It's the people here, it's the leadership here, it's all these different things. And I can tell you firsthand, a lot of this is internal and the choices that we make. Yes, you may be also in a church situation where the culture is that there's more of a culture of burnout, and this is how you need to pastor. This is how you need to function within the leadership culture at the church. But this existential fatigue, and man, I face this on a regular basis of going, is this really worth it? Following the Lord, serving in the local church, helping to build the local church, if this is how I'm really faced with on a constant basis, nothing changes because I was living truthfully, a place of no hope. And when you fall into this place of no hope, it is a very depressive place. You can see it is that there's nothing, the bridge is broken, it's cloudy days, the trees just seem shriveled, the candle wick is all smoldered out. There's multiple different places. Is because I fell into this place, and people in burnout fall in this place going, nothing's ever going to change. This is it. This is my lot in life. God is not good. He's not kind. This is the hardship of just being a Christian. This is what it means to be a pastor. And so we just fall into the place of no hope. I can tell you, though, honestly, you don't have to stay in this place. And based off my testimony and based off of what the Lord desires for us. And so I call this a place of following burnout to now renewal. And so I want to talk from here on out because the first half I can imagine is quite depressive. And imagine talking over the years, people like you're overblowing some things. There's a consistent conversation from people who are burned out. We talk about it in the same way. And so this is a very real that pastors face, that people face. And so I want to talk about the renewal that goes through. And from the renewal, I want to talk about 3 Ps. There's the perspective, learning to rest and abiding instead of pursuing a works-based salvation. Pace, trusting God and resting in Him instead of hurrying and hustling out of worry and fear. Receive before you give out of the overflow of your heart. Pattern, following Christ by setting aside regular hours, days, and weeks to rest from our usual labor. I can't take credit for those 3 Ps. I'm going to give you guys a code. I'll give you more information later. But I want to talk about these 3 Ps for us today because this is very true and this is a very needed. So perspective, learning to rest and abide in Christ. And one perspective is there's biblical self-care. It's stewardship. So it's learning about ongoing development of the whole person including the emotional, spiritual, relational, physical, and intellectual areas of your life. I want to just talk about this is on being an image bearer of God. You were created in the garden out of the dust of this earth. And so we were created to need sleep, but God does not, right? And so then we were created to need Sabbaths, but God does not. You are created to need friends, but God does not. You're created to need food, but God does not. And then created to need the word of God, but God does not. The reason why I start with this is this perspective, especially for pastors, is that we can confuse and say we were created by God for this vocation. No, you were not. You were created to be an image bearer of God, to be a child of God that's been saved by the grace of God. And we have to understand that's our first and foremost. And so we need to live by that, going, I created to need sleep, because when we are falling into burnout, we cut the corners of sleep. We cut the corners of taking the Sabbath time. We cut the corners of needing friends. We cut the corners of needing nutritious food. We cut the corners of needing the Word of God. In all of these areas, you can see how God created Adam and Eve with these. And so with Adam and Eve, he created humans to have capacity. One of the downfalls is that I tended to believe without realizing is that I always ask the Lord, when I went through a stressful situation, Lord, increase my capacity. Did the Lord actually increase my capacity? I just said yes and started putting more time into things and putting more energy into things and not realizing that I only had so much energy for today that I was starting to steal from the next day. And so then I started the next day with not the same tank and then started stealing for the next day. Eventually, I just was really running on empty. And so instead of realizing, going, man, God did not create me with unlimited capacity. He created me with actually capacity. Now, I want to live to the full of that capacity, but not so that I burn out. That's not biblical at all. And so the Lord doesn't want us to burn out. He doesn't want us to rust out either. He wants us to be able to run this life, run the race at a sustainable pace so that we can burn hot for the rest of our lives, the spiritual lives are following him. And I think it's really good for us to remember is that I am frail and fragile, and I do well to never forget it. Christopher Ash wrote a really good book called Zeal Without Burnout, and I would highly recommend and commend that book to you as well, is that we need to remember that we are not God. And for me, my burnout came from a level of pride in my life, of believing I was going to outdo the Lord in multiple different ways, that the Lord really needed me to build his kingdom. And so there was a level of arrogance that I had that the Lord was continuing to break my life and probably still to this day breaking in my life as well. So this perspective. The next one is pace, is trusting God and resting in him to provide, right? And so Christ intentionally got away. And so in Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16, it talks about how he's healing people, and people just got excited, and they started coming to him, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. This is really significant. And I think this is an area of emotional awareness of going, man, the pace of ministry, it is growing, it is getting hard, things are happening, or the pace of ministry is not growing, it's decreasing, or there's just situations that are becoming overwhelming, and I'm discouraged. And Christ had the self-awareness of going, I need to myself, that's called self-leadership, to withdraw. It said he withdrew often into the wilderness and prayed. And I'm going to talk more specifically about pattern, about what Christ did there. But the next one is that Christ asked for the Father's permission. So trusting God and resting in him to provide. This is really significant. How many times in our pastoral ministry do we say yes to something without even asking, should I do this? And because that's the pattern of Christ. Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Are we spending any time asking the Father, should I be involved in this shepherding situation? What should I do in this situation? Should I say yes to this new ministry? Because every time we say yes, it comes with a cost of saying no to something else. And that's one of the burdens that pastors go through constantly. Every time we say yes, there's probably another 15, 20, 30, maybe sometimes more no's we're saying no to. When we're saying no to, it's not a task-driven thing. Sometimes, many times, when we're saying no, it's to people and to relationships. And every time we say yes to something at the church, we are not then saying no to things with our family, or we're saying no to the things with our wife. And so when we're saying yes to another late night meeting, and so then now I'm saying no to rest. And one of the easiest things that churches want pastors to do is they love pastors who are workaholics. And because they love it when we're available. I call that laziness, is that you are become so unintentional with your time that you have to become a workaholic to make up for your lack of intentionality. Now, there's a reverse side of that. There are lazy people in this world who won't say yes to anything because they just want to say yes to just their own time. And so we want to prayerfully consider going, Lord, what do you want me to say yes to today? And for all the things I say no to, I'm going to trust you and rest in you to provide the answers for those people or for that situation that's occurring. And so there's the pace of things. And I like to ask the question, am I running at such a pace that I've outpaced what Christ has created me to live by? Am I trying to outpace Christ in order to accomplish the things that are on my goals, the things that I desire, or am I at the pace where Christ is? And so the only way to do that is to continue to abide in him and to get your renewal from him and not to outpace Christ. So the pattern, following Christ by setting aside. And so we'll go back to Luke chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. It says 5 steps of self-care from Christ's example. And I'll say biblical self-care because Christ did it himself. It's knowing, and we'll break it down verse by verse here, or word by word. So it's knowing when to step away for rest. Are you aware when you're not doing well? Is the leadership around you aware? Do you have those friends aware that saying, hey, you're not doing well, you need to step away for a time of rest? And so then he himself often is being prepared to regularly get away from the pressures of work and service. One of the things that I got wrong when I started ministry is that I looked at the life of Christ and I said he worked really hard and then he rested. When he began his ministry, he went in the 40 days in the wilderness, was tempted by Satan, resisted the temptation. After that, right afterwards, it says the angels came and ministered to him. The scripture doesn't tell us, but the angels cared for him. And then he started his ministry and he worked really hard in his ministry. His sustainable pace is that he often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. And he also practiced the Sabbath rest every single week where he was stopping and trusting the Father to continue to carry on the mission. And so he withdrew. So developing appropriate boundaries to protect yourself from the demands of life. It is okay to say, this is too much for me. That's a good thing to say. When you say, oh, this isn't too much for me, that's a form of arrogance and pride in saying, I don't know what to do here, Lord. Can you help? To where, right? Into the wilderness. You think about it. Christ, when he was here on earth, had specific places that he would go to, that he would go find rest. And so I would encourage every pastor, every church that I moved into, I started finding different places that were my secret locations, which are typically parks. Everybody else knew it, but they didn't know I was going to be there. Or to a place that I found restful and restorative for myself. And what? He prayed. I realized that anytime that I was praying, anytime that I was having moments with the Lord, I was writing them down so that I could go and share it with somebody else. And I realized is that I was trying to produce at all times of my life in order to share because I just wanted, I couldn't quite figure out why, but I realized I actually had no intimate moments with the Lord myself. Like, intimate moments are times where it's just between me and the Lord, and I'm not going to have to share with anybody else. It's like a marriage, is that in a marriage, there are intimate moments between a husband and wife that only they experience, that they're not going to go and share with anybody else, that only they know about. That's intimacy. And so when I realized as I was praying or I was reading the Word of God, it was always about how to share it with somebody else. And so I was never just receiving from the Lord, only just to receive from the Lord. And so I wasn't abiding in the Lord just for the sake of abiding. And so that really helped me. That perspective and that getting into that pattern really helped to change my life on multiple different ways. Christ had some key friendships in his life. In Matthew chapter 26, when he was going through one of the hardest things that he had faced in life, he pulled Peter, James, and John aside. But I want you to think about this as pastors. We are filled with tons of acquaintances, right? They're just the transient relationships that we have. If you're in a church, there's tons of acquaintances in your church. Sometimes they're members, or sometimes they're just visitors, or people who are going to come, and you know their name with a lot of acquaintances. And then there's casual friends that they know you, you know them. You're only really in relationship because you're in the same vicinity with each other. And then there's close friends. Close friends are over the course of the years that you'll always probably remain close friends with each other. Those are really important to have. But then the last space is once again those intimate friends. And I call not just intimate friends, but the other word is those confidants. The confidants, I believe, is really crucial for any pastor if they really want to be able to sustain, or really for anybody in this life, they want to sustain true, like, healthy relationships. And for pastors, it's really hard because there's so many dual relationships that we have. And so these confidential friends, the places we're going, I'm able to just be known for who God has created me to be, just as a child of God. I don't want to have to also be known as your pastor here, where I'm going to have a leadership role over you, or you have a leadership role over me. I just want to be known for me, and so that I can just share of, like, when I'm actually really struggling, without sometimes the fear of, I'm struggling, was just going to get reported up. I don't want to put my friend into a conflicting where they feel like they need to go and share this with somebody if I'm struggling with my faith, or if I'm struggling with any sexual integrity, if I'm struggling with multiple different things, or me and my wife were just not doing well. And so it becomes really essential and crucial, I believe, for the health of the pastor to understand what type of friends you have. And so I want to ask several different questions. Is, who in my life have I been able to talk about anything without concern for repercussions? I think these are questions you actually need to answer yourself. Who understands my work and world such that it would not feel like I had to explain myself to them, but also that speaks the truth and love to me? Who can I name as potential confidants from inside my church system and from outside of it? And then who can stimulate me to grow spiritually? How can I wisely steward my time with them? This is one of the reasons why I did start up Shepherding Care, is to provide safe, confidential relationship for pastors, especially if they don't have any intimate friends. They don't have those confidential friends in their life, is that they need to be able to have a safe place to be able to process the hardships. Because one of the things that happens with burnout is that when you're going through a situation and you have nobody to process this with, and you start to internalize all these things, it becomes very isolating for you. And when you become isolated, you feel very alone. And being alone is that you can preach a sermon on Sunday morning, then you walk out of the Sunday morning service and feel just completely left outside of your church. And so it's really crucial for pastors to have these peer-to-peer relationships where they're able to just grow together in friendship, and they're able to just be known, and can actually even challenge you and encourage you as well. And so as you think through these things, there's the perspective, the pace, and then there's pattern as well. I would say one of the next things is talk to a trusted friend or spouse. If you're not doing well, talk to them. and say, hey, I don't know what to do next, but I feel like I'm burned out, I'm exhausted. So talk to someone. And I would encourage you, schedule a call with me. As I said, this is the reason why I've started up Shepherding Care is that I went through my own experiences, not knowing who to turn to. And by God's grace, He did put friends around me. And so I had to be very intentional with just the recovery that I had to go through. Evaluate your church leadership culture. Is your church equipped for pastors to thrive? Do they have the right, sometimes it's just systems and things in place. I talked to pastors numerous times is that there's no sabbatical policy. There's no time for you to take off. It's just this expectation for you to go and to figure it out on your own. I was talking to a leader recently and he took this new role. There's all these things that were promised to him. Don't burn yourself out like the last person. Guess what? He's now burned out too because the leadership of that organization didn't make some systematic changes or become aware that, hey, there's some things that we're doing that burns people out. And so there's church leadership culture. I can come and help evaluate or have conversations with your church about this as well. The next one, take time away. And so part of shepherding care is that you can do this on your own. I've created partnerships with a couple of different people who have some vacation homes, or also with a ministry that really wants to care for pastors and ministry leaders who are burned out and be able to just bless people with extreme hospitality. And I encourage you, you can reach out to myself and plan that time with me, and I can reach out to the connections that I have for you on your behalf and try and line that up. Or we can also schedule a time to make a plan. That just took 3 days for a mini retreat, and it turned into a silent retreat for myself. I got away from all the busyness, and it was a gift from my wife to be able to go away. But I spent 3 days not talking to any other individual, and I spent those 3 days resting in the Lord, reading through the book of John, reading a good book, and praying. And that was so restorative. I tell you, I was nervous and scared to do it because I didn't know what it was going to be like. By the time I got done with those 3 days, I probably could have gone for a fourth or fifth day because what the Lord was starting to do in my life and revealing different things in my life as well as to what He desired for me. So take time away. And then also, in the partnerships that I've created, and they live right here in the Lehigh Valley, Josh and Victoria Paris, they have a heart for pastors or ministry leaders. And so they started up their own performance institute just for your health. And so you can email them. This is like just a next step. One of the things I didn't want to do is just say, hey, here's all this information, go be well. But here's resources. I want to be a personal resource for you. Here's another resource for you to be able to take care of your physical health for it as well. And so you can reach out to me or you can reach out to them as well. They're right here in the Lehigh Valley. And then the next one is this from P&R Books. As I said earlier, there's Rest, Creating Space for Soul Refreshment. And so you can purchase this book right through the website, and I would highly encourage you. It's very short. One of the things that you really need is that it took to get to a place of burnout. And so we actually disciple ourselves away from the Lord. And so when having this 31-day devotion, it's a way to slowly disciple ourselves way back into this place of rest and making the small changes. We don't think they're going to make a big deal, but these small changes over time that is going to be able to move forward with. Somebody's asked, good only until 3/22/26. Yes, that's what they told me. And so if you would order that, that would be good. So use that coupon code for that. And so, 3/22. We're already past that date. All right, so maybe they gave me the wrong code. I didn't even catch that. Thank you, John, for seeing that. I will update that in an email that I sent out to you. I will ask them that question. I just copied and pasted what they sent to me. So thank you for catching that. We're at our hour mark, and so I want to be very respectful of your time. Thank you for just coming and being part of this. I'd love to have further conversations with you and book an encouragement call and just be a valuable resource to you. Because I said, I want pastors to be able to thrive. I want ministry leaders to be able to thrive. I want missionaries to be able to thrive as well. And so thank you for attending From Burnout to Renewal, how pastors drift into burnout and how to find their way back. Fortunately for me, I drifted into burnout, came out, drifted back. And the realization is that if I don't continue to fight the good fight, continue to take these things really serious in my life, I'll drift back into burnout. And I don't want to ever go back to there. because of the years of depression, the discouragement, all those things that I faced. And so through that, I'm now making strides, making things very intentional in my life not to fall back into it. I participated in Good Friday service last Friday, and I was reading through, and we did the last 7 statements of Christ on the cross. And Christ said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I was reading the Wiersbe's commentary, and he said that this was a child's prayer before they would fall asleep. And it just struck me as Christ was experiencing the wrath of God. He was just been crucified, hanging on the cross. He's saying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so that's my benediction for you, is that as you lay your head down tonight to go to sleep, I pray that you think about the prayer that Christ prayed. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.